All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to our live update on the harp seals named Apollo, Odysseus, and Hydra. These animals were all rescued in March by Seacoast Science Center's Marine Mammal Rescue Team, and they are currently in good hands over with our friends down at the National Marine Life Center in Buzzards Bay. So my name is Brian, and I'm joined by Ashley Stokes, the Marine Mammal Rescue Manager at the Seacoast Science Center, and Lisa Becker, the Marine Wildlife Rehabilitation Director at National Marine Life Center. Did I get that right, Lisa?
You got that right.
Thanks. So thanks for joining us. And Lisa, really thank you so much for taking care of these animals that we've been very busy rescuing in March. It's been a very busy couple weeks with some of these ice seals. The weather's starting to change. They're starting to move back up north. And yeah, we've definitely been kept busy. It's been raining seals on our end, and we're glad to have a place that we can bring them, and we know that they're in good hands. So for everyone out there, we want to just give a quick update on each of these three animals that are currently at National Marine Life Center. So Lisa, is there anything you want to say about these animals before we get started?
No, I mean, it's harp seal season, so we are very happy that you guys bring us the seals, because we couldn't do our work without you. So I think that's really important for us.
Exactly. Such a collaborative part of the work that we do. So it's great to highlight it. But so then let's dive right in. We're going to start off with talking about some updates on Apollo, the harp seal, which was rescued earlier in March. And Ashley is going to begin with the story of Apollo here. So Ashley, kick it off. Let us know how this all started out.
Sure. So for Apollo, so I'll let Lisa in a couple minutes talk about where these names are coming from or where they're derived from. But we responded to this animal on March 3rd over in Newcastle, New Hampshire. So for those of you familiar with the area, Newcastle is a pretty small island adjacent to Portsmouth. But they do, on the nice days, get pretty busy. So this animal reportedly had been there since the day prior, though we didn't get any phone calls about it that day. But on March 3rd, we heard about this animal actually from the police department. The chief of police had reached out to us and let us know that he was out there. And they had actually received, I believe the number was 36 phone calls that morning on this animal. So it was keeping the police department very busy, which we like to try to avoid for obvious reasons whenever possible. Police departments' main priority is human safety, in responding to those situations. Whereas for this case in particular, and for marine mammals, that's why we're here. We have trained responders to send out. So as soon as we got the phone call from the police department, we responded to this animal. And reportedly, we heard from a person that was walking by that said, somebody tried to pick this animal up earlier today. And she said, was that you guys? And I said, nope, this is the first we've heard of this animal. That's why we're out here. We set up a safety perimeter. But for this animal, it was very small. So generally with harp seals, we see juveniles, so anywhere from about 1 to 3, maybe even 4 years old. Every once in a while, we'll get the adult animals, but juveniles have this coat that you see here of kind of the creamy, light-colored belly, a little bit darker on the back, with big, varying brown spots. And for a very young animal, this animal has a lot of spots. Some of the harp seals that we see have very few spots. But you'll see, in that video, you saw that animal was eating snow that we had put in the kennel. So for ice seals, and that includes not only the harp seals, but also the hooded seals that are more rare for us, these animals actually rely on eating snow and ice to stay hydrated between meals because they're used to and accustomed to being on pack ice. But when they get down here and we don't have, if they come down and during a time that we don't have a lot of snow or ice for them to consume, if they're feeling stressed, especially by the presence of humans being too close, they'll actually eat whatever substrate is in front of them. So for our case, if we don't have the snow and ice, they're eating sand and rocks, which you can imagine is very tough on the gastrointestinal tract and can actually be fatal for these animals. So for this animal, his main concern for us was that his breathing was very irregular. At times it was very normal. And then at times, even when we were really far away from the animal, he was just not breathing normally, which makes sense when Lisa will talk about, what ailments he has. But we picked this animal up. You see here, we are starting his full physical exam. So that towel is initially used basically to protect the handler from the teeth of these animals. So they have very large teeth, but you'll see that once he calms down a little bit, we actually remove that towel completely. We don't want these animals to be overheating. And then during their exam process, we collect blood. So basically the same as when you go to a physical and you have blood work taken. They can look at a variety of different parameters. For example, this animal, his glucose or his blood sugar level was 72. And for seals, these animals should be somewhere between the range of about 115, 120, upwards to about 160. So a glucose level of 72 is extremely concerning. That was very, very low. He also had a very high sodium level. So that's indicative of pretty severe dehydration. So this animal, when we had collected him in the afternoon, he wasn't even stable for transport down to rehabilitation. We weren't sure that he was going to make that drive, especially with how he was acting, in combination with his blood work. So we actually held that animal overnight. We were able to treat him with fluids and supplements throughout the afternoon, early evening, as well as the next morning to see if he was stable for transport. And luckily he was. So we were able to get him down there.
Nice. So yeah, that's a great explanation of the rescue process there, Ashley. So now I'm going to pull in Lisa to give a little bit of, some updates of how they treated this animal and what his condition's looking like now. So Lisa, what can you tell us about Apollo?
Yeah, so I mean, Ashley made a really important point that these guys, they at that age, they tend to come in with respiratory problems, and Apollo really got hit very hard when he came in. So he suffered from multiple issues that really compromised his respiratory tract. So we take X-rays of each animal that comes through our doors, and by doing that with Apollo, we found out that he had really severe pneumonia. So here we had one explanation why he was breathing so hard when you guys found him. On top of that, he also had a really severe parasitic infestation. He didn't only have intestinal worms, but he also had lungworms, and not only one species, but both species of lungworm. So this is really as hard as you can have it for your lungs to be affected. So we had to, he had to go through extensive treatment, not only for his dehydration, what Ashley already pointed out, but also for the worms, and then for this really, really intense infection of his lungs. So, however, he was a trooper. He recovered really quickly, and he usually, when these animals go through a severe treatment process like he did, you see like a decline. You see them suffering. For example, the deworming treatment, it kills off these worms slowly. Then they expel them and digest them, and that can take quite a toll on them. However, it was unbelievable how well he handled that, and and really recovered pretty well. What we have to do with cases like him, we have to be careful how much exercise we give them. I mean, of course, as soon as they come out of their lethargy and gain their appetite back, they like to be in water. I mean, especially harp seals. I mean, they spend their lives in water. However, with him, because of how hard his lungs got hit, we had to be very careful with his exercise. So we called it exercise intolerance. So we had to, and we still are controlling him with how much swim time he gets per day, so that his lungs actually get a chance to heal.
Yeah. And so do you control that by which enclosures you keep him in, essentially?
Yeah, so he progressed through most of our stationary enclosures that kind of allow for controlled water access. He's right before the last step where he will have water access 24/7. So he's currently at a point where he has 8 to 10 hours water access right now, but he is doing very well. We haven't seen any signs of exhaustion or lethargy lately, so I think we're ready to very soon to move him up to the final stage of being in water all day, all night.
Nice. So that was going to be my next question is how long do you think, in your professional opinion, it'll be until he can get back out into the big blue?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, of course, these are wild animals. We want to release them, so we can't restrict them as long as you would, for example, restrict a dog who would suffer from the same medical issues. So, but we're at a point with him where we can prepare him back to go back into the wild. So that's really the last step in terms of, checking on his behavioral responses and his energy level. And then on top of that, we also want to make sure that we kind of check off all the things that the federal government wants to see. NOAA, they approve every release. I mean, we request the release to them, and then they decide, depending on the conditions and the parameters, whether or not they sign off on that release. And so one of those would be that he needs to be cleared of all antibiotics for 2 weeks. So he finished his antibiotics a couple of days ago. So I want to say, I'm hoping in the next two weeks or so, we could get him back out there.
Oh, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And one quick question before we dive into Odysseus next. I love all of these names: Apollo, Odysseus, Hydra. What is the theme for this year? How do you come up with these names?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we at NMLC, we have a naming theme every year. The calendar year is a new theme, and we let our volunteers choose those. I mean, they submit themes, and then we vote on it, and then kind of volunteers really drive this home. And so for 2021, they decided to do the Greek and Roman mythology. So there are a lot of names. There have been a lot of discussions on, who should get what name. But Apollo really, so Apollo is the god of the sun and light and music. And since Apollo is a harp seal and he was one of our first male harp seals, we really wanted to make sure we have a representative for music because he's a harp seal. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Thanks, Lisa. So now I'm gonna bring Ashley back on here to talk a little bit more about Odysseus. So this was our second one, that second harp seal, male harp seal, that we were able to bring into rehabilitation. So Ashley, I believe you responded to this one, correct? Along with some volunteers?
Yes, volunteers initially. I didn't head out there until the second day. But this animal was reported right on the main stretch of beach in Hampton, New Hampshire. So Hampton Beach. And initially, the first day, he actually looked pretty good for a harp seal. This time of year, as we get later into the winter and early into the spring, especially now that we're in April now, these animals should be making their migration back up to the Arctic. So that's an important thing to keep an eye on as they do this. Obviously we haven't had snow and ice here in a while, so it's important that these animals are feeding and getting their fresh water and hydration through the fish that they're eating. But for the case of this animal, Odysseus, he was in an area that's always populated by people and dogs. It's a very easily accessible beach, both for people that are younger and can move around a lot easier. But there's also right by where he was, there's a ramp that goes right down to the beach. So he was in an area that's accessible basically for everybody. So because of that, even though he did look pretty good, we wanted to make sure that he wasn't being stressed out by people so that he wouldn't start eating the sand that's out there. So we did keep our volunteers out there for the afternoon just to keep an eye on him. At times he had a little bit of breathing that was inconsistent, but nothing extremely alarming that first day. So we made the decision to actually monitor him and leave him out there, which is very common in this field of work. The reason being, the natural environment is where these animals are meant to be. We don't want to interfere with that if we don't have to. But not only that, rehabilitation space in the region is extremely limited. So we can't be picking up every animal. We're not meant to be picking up every animal. So it's really important in a lot of the cases to monitor them and see how their health is progressing or regressing over time. So we left that animal out there. He was still there at dark, but we don't keep staff or volunteers out there after dark for safety reasons. And again, these are wild animals, so they're out there all the time. They're naturally occurring, right? So we set up a safety perimeter. So federal regulation states that people need to be at least 150 feet away from these animals. We also left up some signage, basically letting the public know we're monitoring this animal. Please leave it alone. If you see anything concerning, give us a call. With the intention that we would be out there first thing the next morning to check and see, is the animal still there? Did it retreat back to the water and swim off? Or, something else going on and it doesn't look as great. So sure enough, the next morning as our volunteer was headed out there, we got a phone call on the hotline from somebody that lives right across the street and knew the animal was out there. And he, gave us a call and said, hey, I initially thought it was you guys that was out there responding to the animal again. But very quickly realized it wasn't us. A couple of people had gone out there, and more than likely well-intentioned individuals, but they ignored the sign, they ignored the perimeter, and they were trying to put a big heavy blanket on the animal. Now that's not something that's naturally occurring out there. These animals are built for this environment, especially harp seals. Ice seals are used to living in sub-zero temperatures. They don't get cold. So granted, this was a very cold, very windy, the sand was blowing around everywhere morning. This animal didn't need that. So that was extremely stressful on him. And that did cause him to begin eating sand, lots of it. So we, the people eventually backed off. Our volunteer got out there. We reestablished the safety perimeter. The animal got a chance to rest. But the amount of sand that he had ingested was really concerning. So we did pick him up. We wanted to get a look at him. And when we ran his blood work, his glucose was sky high. And that's likely an indication of the stress. So their adrenaline will skyrocket. They basically go into this fight or flight response. So oftentimes when the animal has undergone severe stress, some of their blood values won't be true. They'll either be a lot higher than normal. So we like to give it some time to come down. But luckily there was a space in rehab. So given the amount of sand and the little rocks that he had eaten, it was pretty important to get him in to make sure that he stayed nice and hydrated and didn't get impacted as a result of that.
Those are really good points. And so, sorry, I didn't play the video while this was going because it would have muted us, but I'm going to play some video now of Odysseus's rescue that Ashley just explained. And then we'll bring in Lisa again right here. So I'm going to cut to this real. So as you can see there, that was kind of Odysseus's status when we grabbed him from the beach after having that human interaction and having those levels of stress and eating some, ingesting some sand. So Lisa, how did Odysseus look when, in your opinion, when he arrived?
Yeah, Odysseus was in poor shape when he arrived. And I know, especially after, monitoring him for a while, and then the incident with, with members of the public on the beach, that can really do a lot to an animal that's wild and that's not familiar with humans. So yeah, I think Odysseus was the typical harp seal case that we see every year where, not only did the animal get stressed out quite a bit, and that can cause, as Ashley explained, the blood to show certain values that, really express a stress response, but also he was severely dehydrated. We knew he had ingested sand that we also saw then later on here in the hospital through multiple ways. In addition to him, defecating sand, eventually he had really severe diarrhea, which is also a sign of stress. And then on top of that, we also see, and when we run all the blood diagnostics, which we also do on each case that comes through the door, I mean, it was really obvious how dehydrated he was. There are certain values, whether that's the glucose levels, but also electrolyte levels that show us that this animal is really dehydrated. On top of that, he, as you saw it during the rescue, but even while he was in-house here, we saw the respiratory stress that he struggled with. For multiple reasons. He had a hard time, what we call respiratory acidosis, when the animal has trouble getting rid of the carbon dioxide in the body. He also, what we found out when we take in these animals, and I know a lot of other organizations do the same thing, that they collect samples to test for certain diseases, especially viral diseases. And we found out that Odysseus did, with his admission samples, we saw some positive reaction to the flu, the influenza. So not only could the stress have caused, the respiratory problems, but there's also a very good chance that, he was positive for influenza when he just came in. He suffered from that, and that affected him, affected his breathing.
Yeah. And so how was his rehabilitation process different from, let's say, Apollo's, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was some similarity because he also came in with parasites. He was just not as infested as Apollo was. So luckily, he just had GI parasites. So that is a slightly easier process to deworm. He had like a day or two where he struggled a little bit, but then he recovered really quickly. And also he gained his appetite back really quickly. Usually when they go through that deworming process, they don't want anything to do with food, but he handled it well. And then we really gradually brought him up to exposing him to fish, exposing him to water. And he had a really smooth progression. There were no fallbacks. And he's been in our release pool now for a while. You see how active he is. He behaves perfectly normal for exactly what we would expect. He sleeps underwater at times, like he rests on the bottom of the pool, then he comes up, he plays with our environmental enrichment devices. So he doesn't really have any outstanding medical problems. And he's just finishing up his antibiotics. So hopefully we can get into that next phase of the 2-week withdrawal period from medication, and then get him back out there.
Nice. So it sounds like the rehab, he's been doing well in rehab and is kind of on his path to release. But so that's really cool. And I did hear from Sarah before this over with you guys that he behaves like a little monster at the bottom of the pool. I think that's what she referred to. Was that the sleeping at the bottom of the pool behavior?
Yeah. I mean, and it's, a lot of people that are not familiar with seals, or let alone seeing seals behaving, in the wild, or you could see how they rest. When a lot of our new volunteers experience this, when they just start in a hospital and then they see a seal completely motionless underwater, they freak out. They think, oh my gosh, what's wrong with this animal? Somebody needs to rescue this animal. But that's normal for them. I mean, they can hold their breath. I mean, harp seals, up to like 15 minutes on average. So they can sit on the bottom for 15 minutes and do nothing. So it's really something that is quite an experience to observe. Other than that, I think you saw in the video also, like in fact, all of our harp seals in house right now, they're molting. So that is another process that happens right at this time of the year, especially for these juveniles. So, they replace their coat, their skin layer, and then their fur. And you can see on some of the videos, you can see a little bit of the new coat coming through underneath.
Yeah, and that's awesome. So thanks for the update on Odysseus. Now we're going to move on to our most recent admit into National Marine Life Center, Hydra. So I'm going to bring back Ashley here, and we're going to go through a little bit of Hydra's rescue. So this one was pretty unique. Ashley, I don't know if you want to introduce the rescue, and then I was actually down there, the one that went down there, so I can share some of my firsthand stories from it.
Sure. So just to touch really quickly before we move on Odysseus, this is the perfect example of, let these animals be wild animals and keep away from them. He is the perfect scenario where he very well may have been just fine on his own if he wasn't interacted with. Parasites are a common thing for these animals. As long as they're feeling pretty well and their immune system is doing pretty well, oftentimes they can live symbiotically with some of those parasites. But as soon as they get really stressed out or their immune system gets compromised, those parasites can essentially take over. Or, in this case, they'll start eating sand and they can get impacted. We also noticed some swelling in his right front flipper when we collected him and brought him down to NMLC. And that could simply have just been an artifact of those people putting the blanket on him. He could have gotten tangled up in the blanket and just had some soft tissue swelling. So luckily it wasn't a break in that flipper, but this is the perfect scenario where this may have otherwise been an animal that we would not have had to collect and take a valuable spot in rehab. So it's really important to remember that these are wild animals and to keep away from them and let the trained individuals carry out, any monitoring or hands-on that needs to happen.
That's a really good point to make. And it's crucial with this, especially the rescue work and the decision-making processes that we go through. So that's really good to note. And then, so that's Odysseus. So now Hydra was also really shows this decision-making process. So when Hydra so he was reported on March 21st, correct? Yes. And that was down on Plum Island in Newberry. It was a town. And he was extremely lethargic on that day, March 21st. And our volunteers, I'll show you some video. This is actually a quick recap from one of our volunteers, actually, who was the first one down on the scene and stuck around with that animal for a full 2 days, basically. She went home, but she was, with that animal for a while. So I'll pull that up right here real quick.
I've been a rescuer for MMR for the last 7 years now. We got a call on him yesterday morning, and when I got out here, he just was very lethargic. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even responding to me coming near him, which typically they do. They will vocalize or move away, and he didn't do any of that. So we ended up feeding him 13 bags of ice yesterday. He ate some of it and a lot of it melted, and we knew he had already eaten sand, so he was coughing from eating the sand. But once he got some ice in him, that abated, but he hasn't really perked up. And when I got out here first thing this morning to check on him, he was very listless and not responding again. So the decision, was made that he's going to go to rehab.
Yeah, so that was a really great just kind of overview of this response and what was done, what we were kind of looking for. So that animal, like she said, was extremely lethargic, had a pretty rapid heart rate, and something interesting, and you'll see in this is a video of Hydra on the beach. If you notice, so there's the ice that she mentioned. We brought down a ton of bags of these ice that it was consuming, which you'll start to do here. But really, if you look at its eyes, Hydra's eyes, they were just completely shut. That's something that we noticed, very dry, indicating dehydration. But is there anything else that you wanted to note, Ashley, as well, about just the state of that animal when we responded?
Yeah, so the important thing to note, is not all of these species will consume snow and ice. And it's something that we don't do often in the wild. Again, we don't want to be teaching these animals that, they can get nutrition and they can get things from humans, if that makes sense. But in this case, actually on the first day, March 21st, when he was reported to the hotline, rehabilitation spots were full in the region. So we didn't have a lot of options. So, you always, we think about possible relocation to a quieter area. But the area that he was in is surrounded by a lot of private homes. And a lot of those people can become advocates for us and can help us, keep an eye on these animals so that if we don't have to collect it, we don't. It's very foreign for these animals to be put into a crate and loaded into a truck, or even simply as having hands put on them. So we try not to intervene if we don't have to. But in this case, the beach was pretty quiet. The homeowners were doing a great job, in conjunction with our volunteers, of keeping the public away and keeping dogs on leashes. So it was a situation where we could bring in some ice and see if we could get him to be eating that for hydration instead of relying on, trying to eat the sand. Sometimes the young animals will actually confuse, for example, sand and snow, the two different things. But for this animal, Brian mentioned that he had his eyes closed pretty much all the time. And, that's something that's alarming. These animals should be perking right up when somebody gets close to them or they hear a noise that they're not familiar with. And his eyes were just, really closed, really heavily impacted with sand. The nictating membrane, or that third eyelid that they have, was really inflamed, really red. So those were concerning signs as well. So we were trying to figure out, at the end of day one, if this animal is still there tomorrow and rehab is still full, what's our plan of attack? What are we going to do with this animal? So those are all things, that it's not a simple cut dry, with every case. Every case is a little bit different. It takes a lot of steps, a lot of resources to figure out what we're going to do. So thankfully, a spot opened up in rehab the next day. But Brian, you were there for the pickup of that animal. Was not. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing was, even though a spot had just opened up at National Marine Life Center, there was another animal that, while I was driving down to pick up Hydra, and we knew we were already I talked to Lisa, the spot was secured. We had a second weanling gray seal that showed up on the beach just north of where we were. And it was a decision that we had to make: which animal is in worse shape, and which is in more need of that rehabilitation space. And so, we have to make these kind of decisions just on the fly. Like I just showed up to the beach and I had to make this decision before going. So I went out, I checked out the state of the animal. I mean, I'll pull up the video again and you can see this animal. It was on the beach for now at this point over 24 hours, whereas that other weanling gray seal had just showed up. So it was, to me, it was a decision that, had to be made. This was the right decision to grab this animal. And, we'll pull in Lisa now, but, it seemed to be a good decision. It's, Hydra's still down there. And, Lisa will be able to tell a little bit more about how, his current state, and what was wrong with him. But yeah, I'm glad that we ended up making that decision. So I'm going to pull in Lisa here now just to talk about Hydra's rehab a little bit. So Lisa, Hydra looked like a nightmare when I picked him up off the beach. I stopped when I was driving him down to your center. I stopped a couple times on the road just to make sure he was doing all right back there in our rescue truck. So can you tell us a little bit about what he was suffering and, where he's at today?
Yeah. Hydra was very sick when he came in. So, I mean, we tend to see, and I know you guys too, a lot of these cases are human interaction cases. To some degree, human population had something to do with the reason of stranding. And I mean, with him, probably to some degree, but yes, however, though, his medical problems were extensive. Not only the dehydration and as we've already heard, I mean, the problems with the eyes, the fact that he had his eyes closed, really severe irritation to the membrane and both eyes in general, on top of the dehydration, kind of caused him to, really wanting to keep these eyes closed. But then on top of that, the respiratory problems, kind of similar to what we heard with Apollo. He also suffered from really severe lungworm infection, and which can cause pretty intense respiratory problems and difficulty breathing. So so those were kind of the immediate issues that we had to get under control for him to survive. But on top of that, I mean, he did have wounds, and not only superficial wounds, but like pretty, extensive lacerations on his flippers, both rear and front flippers, some puncture wounds as well. I don't think we have any, witnesses who saw what happened to him. I mean, with harp seals, it's likely that sand and rocks can cause those wounds, but it's not rare that we see dog interactions causing these wounds as well. Especially when we see puncture wounds, there's oftentimes indicators that this was inflicted by some dog seal interaction. On top of that, he had some oral bleeding, which is also very likely to be caused by his sand and rock ingestion. Yes, they can eat ice, but ice also melts while they're eating it. If they eat rocks, not so much. So, his oral cavity, his membranes, his gums were inflamed and bleeding actively when he came in. So we had to which makes, tube feeding and hydration therapy a little bit more difficult. However, he pulled out of it. So he is on a good track. He is still going through his deworming treatment, but he's in his final stages. He's perked up quite a bit. He has full water access now, and he uses it wisely. He enjoys going for a swim, but he also takes his time to rest, which is good because he can make his own decision and we don't have to control him that much. With all of that, he's finishing up his antibiotics, and we will have to bring him to the next stage, not immediately, but hopefully maybe in a week or two, and have him swim in a deeper pool and see how he can handle that. He still has absolutely no appetite yet. But again, that could very well be a response to all the treatments that he's going through. Yeah.
And I'm curious with Hydra, how, and harp seals in general, how do you know when that animal is kind of out of the woods? When do you know that, it's got a good chance of surviving the sickness or the injuries that have been inflicted on it? I'm just curious, like what kind of window in the rehabilitation timeline can you make that kind of decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we typically we have an average sort of time span for an animal that comes into rehabilitation, and I want to say that it's plus minus 3 months. Depends on the age. If it's an animal that is old enough and knows how to forage, how to swim, how to travel, typically those candidates don't take, depending on the severity of their issues, but they don't necessarily take as long as, like, for example, a pup that not only on top of everything that's has going on, also needs to learn how to eat, for example, and we have to, kind of, interfere and try to show them how to eat fish and how to forage. But for harp seal, we've done anything from 2 weeks to, like, let's say 8 weeks. So and if we have a case like Hydra who had to go through multiple treatments, then we have again that restriction there to some degree that we have to make sure he's cleared of all medical issues and he's had a withdrawal period from antibiotics. But other than that, I think with these cases that we just talked about, we get really excited as soon as we see that the respiration improves. That's one of the strongest elements that we see as it's a sign of it's going uphill, and the animal is improving, and then eating, gaining weight, and really getting back to like a proper hydration state. That comes just natural with the rehab. But in this case, it's really great to see them being able to have normal breathing patterns, and to also show that activity level that is needed for them to sustain life in the wild.
Yeah, definitely. So I've got my fingers crossed for Hydra, and it sounds obviously he's in good hands. So we'll stay tuned for some more updates on how he's doing and when all of these animals will be actually able to eventually be released. So I'll bring in Ashley again here. So if you want to learn, if you want to stay up to date with these animals, learn about when they will be released, what their status is continuing to look like, follow both the National Marine Life Center and Seacoast Science Center Marine Mammal Rescue on Facebook. That's your best resource. We post all of our updates. And if you want to learn more about how you can help both of our organizations, visit Seacoast Science Center's website and National Marine Life Center's website. There's plenty of volunteer opportunities, ways that you can donate, and just really ways that you can help support both of our missions to rescue these animals and then to successfully rehabilitate them. Is there anything else either of you want to close with?
No, I think that's good. Just realizing that this is, marine mammal rescue is a unique program, and rehabilitation in that it's a program where the client, so to speak, can't pay for or, put towards their rescue and rehabilitation efforts. So it's not an easy thing for any organization to commit to and to take on because there isn't guaranteed state funding and federal funding. Certainly there are grants and things that we can apply for, but we are reliant on the help and the contributions of the public and businesses. And, COVID has put a pretty strong impact on fundraisers, something that we rely really heavily on, as well as National Marine Life Center. So, sometimes people will say, oh, well, I can't donate a lot. No amount is too small. That's something that's really important to recognize. Both of our organizations also have Amazon wish lists if you'd like to, do a physical something instead of a financial something. So it's just something to realize is that, these organizations can't run without support. So if you do support the work, the rescue and the rehabilitation that these organizations are doing, no amount is too small or no help is too small.
Nice. And how about you, Lisa? Anything you want to end with?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think really Ashley just drove it home. This is exactly how it goes. And, I think it goes along the lines of no animal means less to us than another. So we move the whole world to bring in, one more animal. So this is exactly how, every dollar counts. And, as funny as it sounds, but COVID, for a lot of people was a very quiet time. For us, it was the exact opposite. We have never seen that many stranded animals or brought in that many animals for rehab to NMLC than we did in the COVID year. So, a lot of other facilities also struggle. So we tried to do as much as we could. And, we do need the support. And, we're trying to serve, all organizations and everybody who rescues animals and try to rehabilitate as many as we can. So thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here. and thank you to everyone out there who listened and is paying attention to these animals, Apollo, Odysseus, and Hydra. And we'll have some more updates for you soon. So thanks for tuning in. We look forward to talking to you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.